Hello, Charles County. Welcome to another episode of Ready, Set, Prepare, where we talk about all things related to emergency preparedness here in Charles County. I'm Doria Fleischer with Media Services, and I'm joined here as always with Wade Halbert, our emergency manager in the Department of Emergency Services. Thanks, Wade, for being here.
Wonderful to be here as always.
So, Wade, we're talking about a heavy topic today. We're gonna talk about tornadoes.
Yes.
And tornadoes have that word hits differently in Charles County because in April of 2002, our county experienced an F4 tornado that resulted in death and real impact on our community. So I know it's something that I know when I moved here, we talked about a lot of like tornado, it became a thing, but I don't also know if we do a great job of explaining exactly how we can prepare for it and what to do if and when, maybe when is a better way to say that,
right,
a tornado comes to Charles County. So let's dive right in and talk about tornadoes, especially this spring. This is the time of year where we see them, yes?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so emergency manager, emergency preparedness, tornadoes, where does that fall into your line of work?
Well, again, that would fall into any of the severe weather type incidents. You know, again, we've talked in other episodes about, preparedness and response, recovery, mitigation. Obviously you can't necessarily mitigate, for a tornado as you could for, flooding or some other things. But the whole idea, again, as I've tried to, emphasize in these, is we want to get the community prepared, because the more resilient the community can be, the quicker we're going to be able to help each other and get Charles County back on our feet. Okay,
so let's start a little bit about the work that happens behind the scenes with your teams and your partner agencies and the groups you work with. How does emergency services prepare for a tornado, the stuff that we as residents don't see? And then we'll talk about what residents can do to prepare and be resilient.
Right. So, again, we're always training. That's one thing. And, as far as training goes, there's internal, Department of Emergency Services training that occurs where we'll conduct, informational sessions. We'll conduct tabletop training exercises, and ultimately you build on all of those.
And I'm going to pause you for just a sec. Tabletop is a word that gets thrown around a lot in the emergency management field. But I wanted to pause you before you go too far. What's a tabletop exercise? Yeah,
a tabletop exercise is basically a less stressful way to kind of game plan and work through, what would you do in this scenario? So we would bring stakeholders in from various departments. Sometimes we would just do it at the DES level. Sometimes we'll bring in, I'm planning one where we'll bring department representatives in from all over Charles County government, because if a tornado were to occur, it's not just going to be the public safety folks that respond. You're talking about your public works people. There's a component for the commissioners. There's a component for media relations. There's even a component for finance and HR as far as, documentation of things. So, we would want people to get familiar prior to an incident occurring on what their roles and responsibilities might be when that type of incident occurs.
I think that roles and responsibilities thing is so interesting, because you're right. It's not just, I'll go out and I'll do my part. It's how do I go out and do my part and make sure that I'm part of a bigger plan, that we're all doing our own. It's a lot of moving pieces. So I think that's really neat that there's so much collaboration and planning before the event even happens, instead of just assuming we'll all know what to do when it happens.
Right. And, again, Charles County government is like any other business. You've got turnover, so this is not something where you can do a once and done. And in my job, what I end up doing is I create a multi-year training and exercise program. So, every 3 years we'll kind of go through the process again. And, we'll start off with baby steps where, internal department things. And ultimately our goal would always be to work towards one of those larger exercises that the community might be familiar with, where they see people with moulage and, they got the makeup on and, they get to participate in some ways.
Right. So that we get the more training, the better prepared we are when it happens. Okay. So that's kind of what the behind the scenes looks like to prepare. What about the average resident? And I think it's I feel like at some point you're going to say to me, like, stop making me repeat this story. It's the same with every episode. Like, this is how we want you to prepare. But do it again. How do we want you to prepare?
I will never say that, because if we continue to repeat these messages, it's a greater likelihood more people will remember.
Good. All right. So what do we want people to remember?
And so, again, from a tornado standpoint, you're looking at, in particular, if you're impacted directly by it, right? It will be even more critical that all of those preparedness efforts that we talked about before, come into play. with a hurricane, you might sustain heavy wind damage, but maybe your house isn't completely leveled. If your house is impacted by a tornado, particularly if you live in a ranch or a mobile home of sorts, right? Everything could be gone, right? So when we think about those preparedness things, it becomes more critical. Do you have all of your critical information backed up? Do you have a supply of medications? Have you established that communication plan? Again, because in that tornado standpoint, it's going to be quick. It will be devastating, and you may not even be able to go back to your home. Again, as in the case of the tornado that happened here over 20 years ago, there were power lines down all over the place, right? So you may have to vacate, and when you go back, you're going back to nothing. You're not, you see pictures, a couple days later after a tornado where people are literally sifting through rubble. But the question is, if you have nothing to go back to, where are you going to go and what are you going to do? And with tornadoes, again, the sheer devastation that goes with it, there's other elements that happen, as far as trauma, the people that are affected by them, counselors could be involved. There's family reunification centers that would end up getting set up where, what would happen if a tornado would hit, an area where you live and your kids are in school at that time.
You don't get that guarantee of my family will be in my house at the same time. We'll all be together.
Right.
So I think when you said a minute ago about the idea that, a hurricane versus a tornado, and even we've talked about snowstorms, I think it's interesting because when I think about those types of weather events, I have that little bit of time to prepare. Like, it's starting to rain. Oh, it's starting to rain harder. Oh, I'm getting these warnings. Like the hurricane is coming. Whereas when I think about tornadoes, there's not that time to, it's starting to rain, I should go gather, that box that we talked about. Instead, it is coming, I need that box in my hands right now, or I need to know where my family is right now. It's such a different level of, timeliness of being prepared.
Right. And in the emergency management field, we talk oftentimes about no notice events versus notice events. So, the examples you had with the snowstorm or the hurricane, those would be considered notice events. You've got some advanced time to plan. But if it's a tornado, right, you might be monitoring, a lot of people just disregard because they have the weather on their phone and they can instantly look at what it is now, right? They may not be checking regularly to see, what does the storm picture look like right now? And are they subscribed to an alert and warning system that's going to give them that advance notice?
And our citizen notification system is designed to do just that. Yes, that if you are signed up for our citizen notification system, you will get those in the moment, no notice event notifications.
As soon as we get the information that it's likely, you'll get a notice for a tornado warning, a tornado watch. And then obviously if a tornado touched down and impacted an area, message would be sent out there as well, advising people on, potential impact to the area. Don't go here, don't go there.
Right, and road closures.
Those types of things.
Gotcha. So I feel like, again, at the risk of being that broken record, but you said it well, like broken record means people are listening to the song. Signing up for our citizen notification system is just such easy, low-hanging fruit to be prepared. Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So you have your things prepared, you're ready, you know where your medications are, you have a plan with your family, you've signed up for CNS, all of that good stuff. A tornado hits. What do you do? What are kind of the good pointers of what to do or what not to do? Everything from where to go, where not to go, who to call, who not to call.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it's common sense, but sometimes people just need to be reminded. Don't stay out in an open field. With heavy winds like that, just like with a hurricane, you also got to be wary of, debris that could be flying. So the lower you can get underground. That's the best place to go.
Okay.
If you're in a vehicle, stay away from the windows. Get your head down, right? I can't guarantee that smaller, lighter vehicles aren't necessarily going to get moved, but at least you've got some level of protection.
By being down. And you had sent me a resource earlier today when we were talking about all its material about, if possible, don't stay in your car, drive somewhere, get somewhere, go somewhere. And the resource you shared even talked about, which I had never thought about, if you can't stay in your, like if there's nowhere else to go and you have to stay in your car, putting your car in a low-lying area, which I'd never thought about. So
Right.
kind of driving into that ditch or driving into that lower area, which I thought was interesting.
Carefully, right? But yeah.
I always try to drive into ditches carefully.
Right.
I don't always succeed. Sometimes I just end up in ditches, but I always try to do it carefully. Yeah, but being that common sense, like you said, of what can I do to make myself the safest. Okay.
Right.
So if you're at home, getting to that low-lying area, going underground if you can, and then we were talking earlier about, and I know we've said this for a couple of other events, of so many people, it's that reflex of I should call 911, they'll know what to do. When should someone call 911 about a tornado? When should someone not call 911? Why should you call 911? What's kind of the best hints for that?
Right. And again, some of this goes back to the behind the scenes stuff that's going on. Obviously, on a daily basis, what's happening is several of us in the Department of Emergency Services are monitoring the weather. We're in touch with our National Weather Service counterparts, the state, and so we all have different things that we're looking at and how they'll impact our own operations. So if we knew that there were going to be severe storms, various, cold and warm fronts coming in and colliding, those are the things that we would be on the lookout for. And if there was a likelihood of tornadoes, the way it works, Maryland Department of Emergency Management would get the emergency managers on a call saying, hey, this is a series of storm cells we've got coming. They would probably facilitate some sort of briefing with the National Weather Service. And we would all get a heads up as the counties that would have the greatest likelihood of potentially being impacted.
And that's when I love that we have a you, as in I can go about my day.
Right.
Because you're in a 9 o'clock phone call figuring out how to let me know that something's happening. It's a beautiful, thank you for doing that for us, that you're the one who has to be prepared so that you know what to funnel down to all of our community.
Right. And so what would happen is we'd have that heads up at that point, and again, you can't predict where a tornado is going to occur. Who knows? Maybe AI at some point will be able to do that, but technology doesn't exist right now. Okay. And so what would end up happening is after those phone calls would occur, we would kind of notify our partners. There's a distribution group that goes out where I would say, hey, heavy storm cells, possibility for tornadoes, just so everybody's aware. Then, if one would impact the area, again, we want to keep the lines of communication as open as possible. So from a 911 standpoint, again, we're going to know that the tornado is coming. So in our case, you don't need to call us to tell us, I think it's coming, I see it touching down. Okay. It's well-intended, appreciate that, but what you're basically doing is tying up a phone line where somebody else might be calling, 911. Now, after the tornado touches down, or obviously if there's some sort of emergency that occurs, call 911. But after it's down, that's where it's going to be critical, where you decide, is it an emergency? Is it directly impacting your own life safety, or somebody else's? Or is it something where you might be able to call a non-emergency number? You could still get help out there, right? If your house is completely destroyed by a tornado, right? Traumatic, devastating to you, but if you and your family are safe and it's not on fire, do you need to call 911 for that? Or can you call the non-emergency number so we can send people out? We can make sure that we get the Red Cross out to you. We can refer you to a shelter. We can start to do our damage assessments and help you start getting back on your feet. So you can still call.
So I don't need to call 911 to say, I think I see a tornado, because you already know that. You know that better than I do.
Right.
You've been watching it on a radar. I don't need to call 911 and say, a tornado just hit my house. I should call 911 because my house is currently on fire from that tornado. Right. I should call 911 because I got hit in the head with something and I'm bleeding and I need immediate care is very different. And I think those are just helpful examples to give, because it is, I know this is your everyday, but it is interesting that when you're not used to an emergency, it is that reflex of I got to call somebody. Somebody should know this is happening. Right. So I think it's a good reminder to our community that the responders know it's happening. You don't need to call and give them a heads up. Just sit tight and they'll get the help to you.
Right. And again, there's other things that could occur, right? Your house might look fine, but let's say that you see something where it appears a gas line's compromised, or you see power lines down. Again, that shifts it from non-emergency to call 911, because we might not be aware, we may be aware that there's certain areas where the power grid's down, but not this area. We need to be able to, that's another thing I do is we'll be working with our public utility partners to identify and help them get the resources to where they need to go. So that's all stuff that, if a tornado actually hit, the Emergency Operations Center would be in full effect, and we would be coordinating with those various partners.
And maybe that's kind of a good note to kind of wrap up on something that I don't think we've talked a lot about in previous episodes, but it is an interesting thing that I don't know if community knows about. What is the Emergency Operations Center, the EOC? When you talk about that, what is that physically, and what is its purpose?
That'll be a great episode for us to do.
It?
Yeah, we could save that.
Give just a little teaser, and then we'll do a whole episode on it. I like that.
The Emergency Operations Center is basically the command center. You've heard me talk about my Paw Patrol analogy to explain it to my kids, and
right.
and it's that clubhouse where all the first responders and all of the stakeholders get together. So we have a place in Charles County where all the representatives from various agencies would end up meeting, and we have different roles we have to do. So in addition to the fire department having a representative there, and the sheriff's office having a representative there, there's actually going to be a lot of administrative things going on as well, because FEMA's got various requirements as far as tracking information, documenting things, which are all things that we would end up using to submit for reimbursement for a disaster. But what the Emergency Operations Center does is basically the hub to coordinate response to the actual incident.
And so that would just naturally, there's a plan, it just naturally happens, everybody gets to their seats and go.
Yes, Charles County, like virtually every other county that's out there, they've got, we have an emergency operations plan. And some of that is confidential, and some of that is available for the public to view.
I think we definitely have another episode coming on that.
Yes.
And that is, okay, let me just make a little note of that. So when we sit down next time, I can say, we know what to talk about next month. This is beautiful. Any other notes, Wade, on tornadoes? Look, I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to leave here today feeling a little twitchy. Like, it's just not a fun topic to talk about.
Right. Well, it's one of those things. It's again, because it's so unpredictable, so potentially devastating. And again, if you have one that happens at night, that makes it even more terrifying, because, again, you don't have some of the visual cues.
Right.
You can't see, the biggest indicator to you might be a lot of lightning that's going on at some point. So, there's that ominous nature of it.
Right. So the only thing scarier than a tornado is a tornado at night. Thanks, Wade. Now you've given me a double nightmare
Sleep
for tonight.
well.
Yeah, thanks. But the good news, I feel like I'll end on an optimistic note. Our citizen notification system, you can set up the alerts to come in through phone, through text, through email. You can put silent times on it, although for tornado warnings, everything comes through nice, loud, and clear. So if nothing else, Charles County, please take the time, sign up for our citizen notification system so that Wade can make sure this information gets to you in a timely fashion. He'll be up all day, all night, dealing with the state partners like he talked about, but this is your chance to get that information straight from Wade as soon as possible so you can keep yourself and your family and your community safe. Wade, thank you so much for being here for another episode of Ready, Set, Prepare. Obviously, there's future episodes coming, including one on the Emergency Operations Center. We'll put a bunch of links in the show notes so that you can stay up to date with other resources about tornadoes. And thank you so much for tuning in. Take care, stay safe, and stay engaged.
Thanks for listening. If you like this podcast and want to hear more, search Charles County Government on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. And be sure to like and subscribe. We're also available on YouTube. Search Charles County Commissioners. And stay connected for all county news, information, and programs by visiting www.charlescountymd.gov/stay connected.